Hey y'all, hey, it's your good sis Morgan Renee, and we are tuning in for Story Time with More Ma. We're in a new book, Let the Circle Be Unbroken. This is the sequel to Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. Now, if you're watching this on any other platform besides YouTube, I will have a link for this in my Instagram bio, and I'll drop the link in my Facebook comments, but you're already on YouTube, then you're already where you need to be. I read this years ago on my channel. A lot of teachers and students reached out. It helped them with their required reading for school, and I've been requested to read the sequel, said I was going to do it. Here we are years later, but we're here, okay? So let's just hop right into it. This is written by Mildred D. Taylor. And again, this is the sequel to the infamous book, Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, called Let the Circle Be Unbroken. Now, from what I remember from the last chapter of Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, there was some big to-do. The mischievous young man, TJ, that used to hang out with the family, he ended up getting charged with maybe murdering one of the local white owners of a store, and he was getting carried off. There was a big fire that happened on the land, and Cassie and her family was going on about their life, but TJ was going to be locked up somewhere. So let's see what transpired since then. So starting off, Mildred says, to the memory of my beloved father, who lived many adventures of the boy Stacy, and who was in essence the man David. This is his legacy. I will continue the Logan story with the same life guides that have always been mine, for it is my hope that these books, one of the first chronicles to mirror a black child's hopes and fears from childhood innocence to awareness to bitterness and disillusionment, will one day be instrumental in teaching children of all colors the tremendous influence that Cassie's generation, my father's generation, had in bringing about the great civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s. Without understanding that generation and what it and the generations before it endured, children of today and of the future cannot understand or cherish the precious rights or equality which they now possess, both in the North and in the South. If they can identify with the Logans, who are representative not only of my family, but of many black families who faced adversity and survived, and understand the principles by which they lived, then perhaps they can better understand and respect themselves and others. And that's from the author, Mildred D. Taylor. She said this from her Newbery Award acceptance speech in 1977. So let's get into it, y'all. Chapter 1 of Let the Circle Be Unbroken, sequel to Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. Ain't that Wardell? Papa and the boys peered out into the deepening shadows as a slight figure slipped from the dense forest on our right and across the defile to the hardness of the red road and vanished into the trees on the other side. My eldest brother, Stacy, sat beside Papa on the wagon seat. Christopher, John, and Little Man were in the back of the wagon with me. Could have been Cassie, Papa said, slapping the reins lightly across the mule's back, urging him on, for the November light was slowly failing, and we had one more stop to make before we went home. Already we had passed the Morgan place. Or at least what used to be the Morgan place, which was now government land, like so many other farms taken for taxes by the state of Mississippi in the 4 years since 1930. We had passed as well the Great Faith School and the church grounds with the semicircle of 5 fragile-looking, weather-beaten buildings on skinny brick feet. Now we were approaching the Granger plantation, which sprawled southward, northward, and westward for some 6,000 acres, almost 10 square miles. Up ahead, the Silas Lanier house, standing unpainted and gray in the midst of the drying cotton stalks, marked the beginning of it. Past the Laniers were the Mason Shorters, and across from them, tucked behind a growth of untrimmed bushes and second-growth trees, were the Page Ellises and their aunt, Mrs. Leanie Lees. At the rutted, narrow trail leading to the Ellises, Papa pulled up short on Jack's reins, turning the wagon inward. Going up the trail, we entered a clearing where 2 tenant shacks, one belonging to the Ellises and the other to Mrs. Leanie and her grandson, Wardell, stood cat-a-corner to each other. Sitting barefoot on the porch of the Ellises' house were 2 of the Ellises' boys, Son Boy and Don Lee. With them were little Willie Wiggins, one of Stacy's best friends and fellow 8th grader, and his brother Maynard. "How y'all folks doing?" Papa asked as we stepped down from the wagon. Papa was a tall, pecan brown-skinned man with both a reputation and a bearing that commanded respect. All 4 boys stood to greet him. "Just fine, Mr. Logan," they answered. "How are you?" "Doing right well." Papa shook hands with each of the boys as if they were men and looked around. "Where is everybody?" Some boy nodded toward the backyard. Mama and Papa, they's round back. Aunt Leanie, too. They tending to the old mules of ours, down with the colic again. They's afraid he ain't gonna make it this time, put in Don Lee, the younger of the two. That's a shame, said Papa. Guess I'll just go on back and see if there's anything I can do. Yes, sir. We watched Papa go between the two houses toward the barn, then settled on the porch. How long y'all been here? Stacy asked the little Willie, beside him on the step. We just stopped by y'all's house, and your mama said you and Maynard and Clarice had done gone up to the Averys. Little Willie nodded. Mama had some milk and preserves and stuff she wanted them to have. We was on our way back home, but Clarice claimed she just had to stop by here a minute and see Thelma. Shoot, the way old Thelma talk, said some boy of his older sister, y'all be lucky to get away from here for nightfall. I tell you, Stacy, women, sighed little Willie. Talking about a minute, and here's been a good half hour already. Ain't that the way, Stacy said, like he knew what the way was. Oh, man, you don't know nothing yet. Just wait till Cassie there get older. Now, just how my name getting to this? I demanded from the porch rail. I'm just sitting here minding my own business. Ain't done nothing. Little Willie slid a sly glance my way. But you will. I scowled down at him. And just what I'm going to do. Just wait. You'll find out. Boy, how was everybody at the Averys? Said Stacy, cutting me off, an irritating habit he had recently picked up. Little Willie leaned back on the steps, his elbows supporting him, and shrugged. About the same. Ain't none of them looking too perky. You had a brother down in jail. I don't much expect you to be looking too perky either, I pointed out. He glanced back at me and grinned in agreement. You sure enough right about that, Cassie. Don't expect I would. They had any news? Asked Stacy. About a trial, I mean. Well, to tell the truth, they ain't said nothing, and I ain't asked. Ain't thought I oughta. Stacy let out a labored sigh. Lord, I hate this. Who'd have thought just a year ago? Who'd have thought? All of us pondered his words in the late afternoon silence. Then some boy shouted, Hey, Dubé! Dubé Cross! We looked out past the wagon to the trail, where a tall, muscular boy had just entered the yard. 16 years old. Dubé Cross looked more like a man than a boy. Yet despite his size, he was just in the 5th grade. Barefooted, he crossed the yard in a rudely patched pair of pants that were too short and a mended shirt that was too small, and greeted us in the stutter that was natural to him. Then he turned to Stacy. I was just on my way down to y'all's place when I seen y'all turn in. Mama need milk for the youngins, and I was just wondering if y'all had work. Dubé, I said, Big Ma say y'all can just have that milk. Stacy cut me off again. Well, we ain't got no work we don't tend to ourselves, but you want to come milk in the morning, I expect Papa consider that payment enough. But that's our job, spoke up little man, who took everything he considered his quite seriously. Christopher John, a round boy with a bit more tact, gave little man a sharp nudge in the ribs, and he grew silent. Well, we be obliged to y'all. Y'all's welcome to the milk, you know that, Stacy assured him. Fact to business, y'all be doing us a favor, y'all take it. With times like they are, it don't hardly pay to take it into town. Can't get nothing much for it. Just have to give it to the hogs to keep it from going to waste. Dubé nodded, accepting Stacy's words somewhat awkwardly. He was a proud boy, and despite our willingness for his and other families who had no milking cows to have the milk we didn't need, I sometimes felt that Dubé was ashamed to ask for it. He did, though, mainly because he considered himself the man in his house. Living with his mother and an assortment of younger brothers and sisters in a one-bedroom, tar-papered shack along the roads on Soldiers Road, Dubé had for years helped his mother take care of the fatherless family. But for all he did, things were still bad for the Crosses. Like others along the road, the Crosses had no land, rented or otherwise, to till. They were day laborers who picked cotton for wages, and day laborers were the least paid and the worst treated of the farming community. For them, life was even harder than it was for the rest of us. Why don't you come on back with us? Stacy suggested to him. We'll be headed home directly, and there's plenty of fresh milk in the pantry from this morning y'all can have for supper. Thank you kindly, Stacy, but I'd rather do the milking first, you don't mind. I'll be on down first thing in the morning. Stacy nodded, understanding. Suit yourself. Well, said little Willie, getting up. Looked like old Clarice done got lost in there. Clarice, come on, girl. We gotta go. Clarice took her own good time coming out. When she finally did, the Wigginses left, going back down the trail along with Dubé, just as Papa and Mrs. Leannie Lees came from the backyard. Well, exclaimed Mrs. Leanie, stopping at the corner of the house. She put her hands on the hip and tried to look vexed. Well, ain't y'all gonna give me no sugar? Although Stacy, Little John, Little Man, and I agreed that all this hugging and kissing business was really quite unnecessary, we didn't mind so much when it came to Miss Leanie. Heavy set, in her mid-60s, with bones that were fine and skin that was the color of a clear honey and as soft as the down on a baby chick, she was one of the most beautiful women we had ever seen. Besides that, she was fun, and we loved her. Once Mrs. Leanie had got her first hug from each of us, she ushered us toward her porch. My boy Russell, he gonna sure enough be glad to see y'all, she said. Sure is. Russell, I questioned. She stopped to look at me. Ain't some boy in Don Lee done told y'all? Why, Russell, he come late this morning. He over there visiting with Aunt Callie Jackson, but I done sent Javen for him. He'll be coming on up here directly. The boys and I exchanged delighted glances. We liked Russell. Everybody did. The son of Mrs. Leanie's oldest daughter, Russell Thomas, had been brought up by Mrs. Leanie and had his cousin, as has his cousin Wardell. A little over a year ago, he had gone north to live with an uncle in Indiana, and we had not seen him since. Mrs. Leanie laughed happily. Always was crazy about you, David, she said to Papa as she opened the door. Remember how he used to tag after you so? Inside, we were greeted by Mr. Tom B., an elderly toothless man who was a cousin of Mrs. Leanie's and lived further down on Harrison Road. Y'all come on in and join me and these here peanuts, he invited, beckoning us. Oh, okay. Y'all come on in here and join me and these here peanuts, he invited, beckoning us to where he was comfortably seated by the fire with a black pan on his lap. You're looking mighty good there, Brother B., Papa said, going over and shaking his hand. Looking good and feeling good, too, boasted Mr. Tom B. Sure is. Y'all sit on down. The one-room house smelled strongly of burning pine and roasted peanuts mixed with the unmistakable smell of mustard greens. All were good, lived-in smells, and the boys and I, with handfuls of the warm peanuts to munch on, had just settled back on Mrs. Leanie's corn husk mattress to enjoy them when Mr. and Mrs. Page Ellis came in. A few minutes later, Son Boy and Don Lee's older brother Javen arrived with Russell Thomas, a dark-skinned young man of 19 dressed in an army uniform. Well, looky here, said Papa, standing to greet him. You gone and joined the army. Russell smiled wildly and shook Papa's hand. Figured that was better than starving, Mr. Logan. He greeted Stacy, Christopher John, Little Man, and me with a fond grin and settled in front of the fire with the rest of the adults. Yes, sir, I figured after more than a year away, I just better get myself on back home and get me some of Mama Lee's fine cooking before I waste away to a little or nothing at all. Laughing, Mrs. Leanie slapped her grandson's knee with delight. How you come? Papa asked him, hoping you was going to be with us a while. Come by train far as Jackson, then took the bus on down to Strawberry. Sad thing is, only got 4 days. Figured to take the bus Monday morning back up to Indianola to see Mama, spend a day with her, and head on back. Ain't got hardly no time at all, but I just had a hankering to see everybody. Well, we all sure glad you come, said Papa. Amen, agreed Mr. Tom B. Well, I done already told this boy, though, said Mr. Page Ellis, pulling a tobacco pouch from his shirt pocket. He better be watching himself going through to that Delta country in that soldier outfit. Them some mean white folks up in that Delta. Papa's face lined into a wry smile. There's some mean white folks everywhere. Russell laughed. Ain't that the truth? Besides that, interjected Mrs. Ellis, a lot of Bilbo folks up there. That old devil, muttered Mrs. Leanie. Anywhere there's rednecks, you got Bilbo folks, Papa said. Who's Bilbo? I whispered to Stacy. Stacy frowned. I think he used to be a governor or something. He up in Jackson or Washington somewheres. Oh, I said, wondering why everybody up in Jackson or off in Washington would be of any interest to Papa or Mrs. Leanie. Mrs. Leanie leaned over in her seat to stroke the fire. You know, I heard him once when I was working for them white folks up in Jackson about 20 years back. Him and that no-good Governor Vitamin, too. Them two must have figured color folks wasn't more than animals. Figured God meant for the white folks to rule. She looked around, a mischievous glint in her eyes. I'd have ever gotten a hold of either one of them devils, I'd have showed them a little black folks rule. All the adults but Mrs. Ellis laughed. Well, what I say is Russell still better be careful. She looked directly at him. You ought to take that uniform off. Cousin Leora, that ain't gonna bother me none. Russell winked at the others. I represent the United States government. Mrs. Ellis sniffed. United States government, my foot. What they care about in the United States government? They soon kill you as look at you up there because you give them any... Let me go back to their country. Mrs. Ellis sniffed. United States government, my foot. What they care about in the United States government? They soon kill you as look at you up there, you give them any sass. They bull whipped 3 colored boys in that Delta not so long ago, and they was representing your United States government too. Russell nodded soberly, conceding the point. Then he said, talking about your mean white folks, I understand y'all had a bit of trouble down in here y'allselves this summer. Both Stacy and I looked at Papa, who was calmly placing his empty pipe between his lips. It was more than a bit of trouble, volunteered Mrs. Ellis. And it ain't hardly over yet, added Mr. Tom B. Joe Avery's boy, TJ, went and got himself in trouble, Mr. Ellis explained. Messing around with 2 of them no-count Sims boys. Them white boys? Questioned Russell incredulously. Mr. Page Ellis nodded. The 3 of them upped and robbed Mr. Jim Lee Barnett's store in Strawberry. You remember that place, don't you, son? Asked Mrs. Ellis. Sure do. That old redneck owns it, too. I began to fidget, not wanting to hear. Well, he got killed, said Mrs. Ellis. You don't say. They said the Avery boy and the 2 other color boys done it, continued Mrs. Ellis. Wouldn't believe it was them Simses. And then them men come out over to the Averys and would have done lynched the boy. That fire hadn't have come up on Brother Logan's place. The hand of God, interjected Mrs. Annie, shaking her head. The mighty hand of God. Burnt a good quarter of your crop, too, didn't it, David? Papa pulled on the pipe, his eyes meeting Mr. Ellis's, and nodded without expression. Russell digested all that had been said in the silence that followed. Well, he said, finally looking around, what come of the boy? Mrs. Leanie nodded in the direction of Strawberry. He's still in jail down there in town. Don't know what they doing, observed Mr. Tom B. with a shake of his head. I seen the time they wouldn't have done took care of him long for now. I seen the time they would have done took care of him long for now. You expect they gonna give him a trial? Russell asked. Mr. Ellis shrugged. They ain't gonna hardly waste no time on no trial for no colored boy. They know what they gonna do to him anyways. Well, he do get one. It'll be the cause of Mr. Jameson, put in Mrs. Ellis. He been trying mighty hard to get him one. Mr. Tom B's displeasure showed on his face. Don't see how come he want to bother. They're going to hang TJ anyways. Ain't no doubt about that thing, because they sure is. His statement was final and undisputed. I longed to go. As if some boy had sensed my discomfort, he jumped off the bed and motioned the boys and me to come with him. Relieved, little man, Christopher John, and I followed with Don Lee. Stacy came too, though he lagged behind, and once we were outside on the porch, stood apart from us, staring out toward the woods. The rest of us tromped to the end of the porch where some boy wheeled around and announced, I got something to show y'all. Well, what? Christopher John, little man, and I demanded. Some boy grinned wildly and delved deeply into his warm pants. Look here. See what Russell brung us. He pulled a clenched fist from his right pocket and opened it slowly. Don Lee did the same. Ah! Christopher John, little man, and I exclaimed in unison. In their palms lay 10 marbles apiece, each a different color. And that ain't all, said Don Lee. Show him the real beauty. Even slower than he had brought forth the other marbles, some boy dug into his other pocket and, with his face plastered in a prideful smile, produced his treasure. And it was a beauty, a penetrating blue swirling through an island of misty emerald green. Some boy held it up toward the pale November sun and then brought it close so that each of us could peer through it. Little man and Christopher John eyed in appreciation, and even Stacy admitted that it was nice, but I was totally fascinated by it. I could feel my eyes growing big as I stared at it, and without thinking, I reached out to take it from some boy so I could inspect it more closely. Some boy firmly closed his fist around it. Ain't nobody touching this baby but me, he said. And me, reminded Don Lee. Some boy made no comment, but I had a feeling that Don Lee wasn't coming any closer to that marble than any of the rest of us. Ah, shuckies, boy, I exclaimed. Ain't nobody wanting your old marble. I just wanted to get a good look at it, that's all. Come on and open your hand. Some boy turned deaf ears to my request as he pocketed his treasure, patting it through the thin cloth of his pants to make sure it was secure. Then, as if somewhat remorseful about his selfishness, he again opened his right fist. "Want to play?" he asked. I dug out the marbles I had won from Curtis Henderson a few days ago. Some boy frowned disdainfully. "That all you got?" "That's all I need," I said, confident that after 3 quick shots, 3 of his marbles would be mine. "I got one too," proclaimed little man, adding a 4th marble to my pile. "I get a shot," he added. "We better get down here," said some boy, hopping from the porch with his wide spaces between the porch slats. Don Lee, Christopher John, little man, and I jumped down too, but Stacy remained on the porch. "Ain't you going to play?" I asked. "No, I'm going back inside," he said, starting back down the porch. I stared irritably after him. A year ago, he would have been right down here playing too, but now at 13, he had changed so much that he seldom deigned to play with us at all anymore. Mama said that was because Stacy was becoming a man, that it was natural for him to change, and that I would change too. Maybe that was so, but I didn't like his changing, and I didn't like the thought of my changing either. Maybe it was the way of life to change, but if I had my way, I would put an iron padlock on time so nothing would ever have to change again. "Stacy's taking it bad, ain't he?" observed some boy who knew, as everyone else did, how close Stacy had once been to T.J. Avery. For years, Stacy had been T.J.'s best and just about only friend. Although a lot of people, including myself, had never been exactly crazy about T.J., Stacy had remained his friend until he had caused Mama to lose her teaching job at Great Faith last spring. But even with all that TJ had done, Stacy had not deserted him. On the night Jim Lee Barnett was killed, TJ had turned to Stacy, and Stacy had helped him. "You suppose they really gonna put old TJ to death like folks say?" some boy wondered, absently shaking the marbles in his hand, the impending game for the moment forgotten. I faced him with an icy gaze. I didn't want to think about TJ or what had happened or what could happen. "Thought you wanted to play," I said. Some boy's eyes met mine and he shrugged. "All right then, let's play." Picking up a stick, he outlined the outer and inner circles for the game. He placed little man's and my marbles, alternating them with his, around the inner circle, then took the last of my marbles, a red, and one of his, a yellow, and shook them up in his hands. Don Lee, his eyes covered by Christopher John's pudgy hands, made the draw from my brother's hand, picking the red one. I got the first shot. "Cassie, let me shoot," demanded little man, neatly avoiding any dirt as he, like I, sat on his haunches. "One of them's mine, you know." I started to object to little man shooting at all, but decided against it since I needed his marble and did not want to snatch it from the circle. "Just let me shoot down one of their first men," I said. "Then you take your turn." Little man frowned and conceded. He was a very rational boy and accepted the fact that I was better and more experienced shot than he. The object of the game was to knock the opponent's marble out of the circle. Any such marble then became the property of the person who knocked them out. I did very well, but on this particular day, neither some boy, who was usually an excellent shot, nor Don Lee was having much luck. Little man and I handily took 4 of their men in a row. Even Christopher John took a roll and scored. In fact, we were on our way to whipping some boy and Don Lee out when Papa said, "What y'all doing here?" I looked up, my shooter marble still in hand. We had been so engrossed in the game we hadn't heard him come out. "Playing marbles," I answered. "And we whipping the pants off him too, Papa," boasted little man. "That a fact?" "Yes, sir," grinned Christopher John, still jubilant over having claimed one of some boy's marbles for his own. "Well, I think y'all's best give some boy and Don Lee's marbles back to them." "But, Papa," I protested him, "we want them fair." Papa motioned toward the marbles. "Some boy, you and Don Lee take your marbles." Christopher John, little man, and I regarded Papa with dismay as some boy and Don Lee joyfully scooped up the marbles which rightfully belonged to us. "What about them?" Papa asked, concurring the 3 marbles on the ground. "They're ours," I answered. "Then give them here." I gathered up the marbles and gave all of them, including the one in my hand, to Papa, who deposited them in his coat pocket. "All right, go get in the wagon. We going now." Once we had said goodbye to Mrs. Leanie and the Ellises and had started home again, Papa said, "I don't want y'all playing marbles no more." Little man, Christopher John, and I stared aghast at Papa. Stacy, however, showed no concern. Since he now considered himself above such childish games as marble playing, he no doubt felt the edict didn't affect him one way or the other. I had seen it lead too many times to gambling, and that gambling is like a sickness, a terrible thing, can destroy a person. Anytime you take possession of somebody else's things through a game, there's usually going to be hard feelings. Now, that marble shooting might go on perfectly all right for a while. Then one day somebody will get mad about losing or cheating or something, and there'll be trouble. Then again, somebody will decide winning marbles ain't enough, and they'll start betting money and you into gambling. But Papa, I protested, we wasn't doing nothing wrong. Not now, Cassie girl, and I don't want you to either. That's why I want y'all to leave this marble playing alone. There's plenty of other games to play. But Papa, there ain't no changing my mind about it. So you just might as well make up yours to the fact you've played your last game of marbles. You decide otherwise, you know what I'm going to have to do, don't you? Yes, sir. All three of us murmured with a noticeable lack of enthusiasm. Although I knew perfectly well that Papa would whip us good if he found out we'd been shooting marbles again, the whole thing made no sense to me. We hadn't been gambling, and I, for one, had no intention of doing so. There was nothing I loved more than a good game of marbles, and I was good at playing them, too, better than most anybody, including some boy. I hated the thought of giving up the game, but I knew as well as Christopher John and Little Man did that Papa had meant what he'd indicated about the whipping. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. Okay? Ain't trying to get no whipping over no marbles. Now she addicted to the marble game. It was some boy who started it all. There I was, sitting in Sunday school with my Bible verse firmly planted upon my lips when he pulled out the emerald blue marble and started flashing it to all the boys and girls securely hidden by the first row of students. Rolling it between his thumb and forefinger, he had every marble addict present drooling over his prize. But true to his word, he allowed no one to touch it but himself. Finally, unable to stand it any longer, I whispered to Little Man beside me, "I'm going to get that thing." Christopher John, sitting on the other side of Little Man, turned toward me horrified. "Cassie, you can't. You know what Papa said." "I gotta have it." "I bet you're gonna have a whipping too," predicted Little Man. "Maybe so. Papa found out. But I've got to figure out a way for some boy to let go of that marble. Maybe, Cassie." It was Mrs. Letty Love, the elementary Sunday school teacher. I stood quickly. "Yes'm. You learn your Bible verse for the week?" "Yes'm. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house or anything that is thy neighbor's," I said dutifully without a moment's guilt. And she about to try to covet his marble. Girl. Mrs. Love smiled, happy that one of her students had learned her verse so well. I sat down smiling too as I stared down the row at Sunboy. He might as well get in his last few minutes of glory with that marble, because I planned for it to be mine within the hour. Ooh, Cassie getting bad, ain't she? Immediately after Sunday school, Little Man and I found Maynard Wiggins and Henry Johnson, who had kept marbles jiggling in their pockets since school had begun, and put a proposition to them. If they would put up their marbles against some boys' 10, I would do the shooting with the promise that if I began to miss, Maynard or Henry could take over to recoup their losses. If I won, they would each be richer by the number of marbles they put up. If I lost, then that was just the chance we took. All I wanted from the deal was some boys' emerald blue. As we were making our plans, Joe McAllister wandered over carrying some boys' baby As we were making our plans, Joe McAllister wandered over carrying some boy's sister's baby. Joe was a short, bandy-legged man with a face that could have been 20 or 40. There was just no telling what age he was by looking at him. Big Ma said that was because he didn't have any words to speak of, and folks with no worries didn't show their age much. "What y'all youngins up to?" he asked. "Nothing, Joe," I said. Everybody called him Joe. Well, his name's Joe McAllister. What else would they call him? Well, they do be having nicknames in here. "Y'all see this child here?" he said, indicating Doris Ann, who was almost 2 years old. "She sure like old Joe." "That's nice," I said, just wanting him to go so we could get on with the business at hand. "Her mama always asking me to look out for her. Her papa, too. They know old Joe take good care of her." "Yeah, well, ain't that her mama calling for her now?" asked Henry. Joe stood still, cocking his head toward the church. "Didn't hear nothing," he said. "Thought I did," said Henry. "I better go check." "Yeah, maybe you better." Joe walked off a little way, then stopped. "Gots to ring that bell come church time. They pins on me for that, you know." "Yeah, that's nice, Joe," I said. "Now," said Maynard as soon as Joe had gone on his way, some boy ain't gonna hardly put up that emerald blue." "Yes, he will," I said with confidence. How you know? Questioned Henry. And how you know he gonna want to play anyhow? 'Cause he greedy, that's why. Look, y'all gonna give me your marbles or not? We only got half an hour to church time. Maynard and Henry went off for a short conference, then came back, agreed that they would risk their fortunes on me. We decided that it would be best for them to make the arrangements with some boy. As they hurried off, I hollered after them, "Tell him he's got to play all 10. It won't be no good unless he play all of them. And don't be saying nothing about playing that emerald blue. You do, he probably won't play." Christopher John, who had stood disapprovingly apart from the troubling proceedings, hurried over and tried to make me see the folly of my ways. "Cassie, Papa gonna skin you alive, sure. He find out. You know that? What's the matter with you anyway? You gone crazy?" He certainly had a point. But not even the thought of Papa's belt could turn me from the course I had set for myself. That emerald blue had a nasty hold on me, and if I could just get my hands on it, I promised myself and God that I'd never shoot marbles again. And perhaps, if luck was with me, Papa would never even have to know I disobeyed him. Soon Maynard and Henry returned. The deal was set. We would meet some boy down by the fallen tree about 5 minutes deep into the woods. "What?" exclaimed little man, not too pleased about the chosen site. To reach the fallen tree, we had to scurry through some pretty heavy growth, and chances of a stain were great. Little man was a most particular boy when it came to his clothes, his school materials, anything. He frowned down at his immaculate jacket, pants, and shoes, then at Henry and Maynard, and demanded, "Couldn't y'all find no place better than that?" "Can't play no closer to the church," replied Maynard. "Y'all going or what, or not?" "Yeah, we going," I said, hurrying toward the middle grades class building. The path leading into the woods was behind it. Little man, deciding that too much was at stake to remain behind, followed with Maynard and Henry. Christopher John pulled up to the rear, shouting warnings that not only was Papa going to get us, but God too. "Why don't you just go on back and stop bothering me?" I told him when we reached the fallen tree where Sun Boy and Don Lee, along with Curtis Henderson, were already gathered. "Y'all come too." "Not till I get that emerald blue," I whispered. Pushing my coat out of the way, I dug into my dress pocket and the only useful feature in an uncomfortable garment and pulled out the marbles Maynard and Henry had placed in my keeping. Then I settled down on my haunches, trying to keep my dress from dragging in the dirt. The battle began. Luck was with Sunboy. He got first shot, then immediately captured 3 of our men. Nervously, I made my shot and missed. "Cassie!" cried Maynard, as he and Henry scowled down at their rapidly dwindling marbles. Their faith in me was quickly ebbing. Sunboy laughed. "Didn't y'all know couldn't no girl be good as me?" He shot again, but this time his shot marble hit nothing. "Serve you right," judged little man. I went for my turn, feeling the perspiration trickling down my arms, despite the chilliness of the day. But before I could shoot, Maynard grabbed my arm. "Better let me shoot," he decided. I snatched my arm from his grasp, and before he or Henry could object, shot and connected. After that, the game was mine. I sent the last of Sunboy's marbles hurling into our hands, then sat back on my ankles and stared across at Sunboy, who looked as if he did not quite realize he had just been wiped out. Meanwhile, little man, Maynard, Henry, and yes, Christopher John too, were whooping it up at our victory. "Would y'all shut up?" I demanded. It was almost time for the bell to ring, and there was still the matter of the emerald blue. Immediately, everyone hushed. "Look here, Sunboy," I said. "To tell you the truth, I hate to see you wiped out like this. I mean, seeing Russell just give you them marbles." I grew thoughtfully quiet as Sunboy's face began to show signs of hope at my sympathetic attitude. "I'll tell you what," I said when I felt he was approximately hopeful enough to hear my next statement. "If you want, we'll give you a chance to win all your marbles back, plus ours, with one shot." "Now hold on just a minute, Cassie," cried Maynard, with Henry backing him up. Already they were dividing the marbles and had forgotten that I still did not have what I had come after. I cut my eyes at them, copying the look Papa gave people when he was angry or deadly serious. Both Maynard and Henry grew silent. But I ain't got nothing to shoot against. But I ain't got nothing to shoot against. Hold on. Let me back up. They so country. I cut my eyes at them, copying the look Papa gave people when he was angry or deadly serious. Both Maynard and Henry grew silent. But I ain't got nothing to shoot against," said Sunboy. "You got your emerald blue?" Sunboy's lower jaw dropped. "You win," I propositioned. "You get to keep it. Not only that, but you'll have 20 other marbles jiggling in your pocket. What we'll do is both shoot for the emerald blue. First one knocks it beyond the outer circle gets it." I inhaled deeply as I made my final ploy. "I'll even let you go first." She bold. Little man and Christopher John looked at me in pure disbelief. Henry and Maynard just looked sick. Some boy considered. All was quiet. He pulled the emerald blue from his pocket and whirled it around in his palm. The emerald blue was almost mine, yet I couldn't help but feel sorry for some boy. In a few minutes, he had lost almost all his treasure, and if he was the boy I thought he was, he would risk the rest of it to try and get it back. But if he just used his head, he could keep the most precious part. The rest of the marbles were nothing compared to what he held in his hand. I decided that if some boy played the emerald blue, he was a fool. Okay, he said, placing the marble on the line of the inner circle. Papa had been right. If gambling was anything like shooting marbles, then it was a sickness. But then I hadn't totally used good sense either, risking one of Papa's no-nonsense whippings for a piece of glass. Maybe I was as big a fool as some boy. Go on, I said. Shoot. Some boy nervously licked his lips and shot. He missed. I didn't. You done it, Cassie. You done it, cried little man and Christopher John, slapping me on my shoulders as I reached out to claim my prize. Tenderly caressing the emerald blue between my fingers, I held it toward the sun. It was a powerful thing. I'm already premonitioning that this gonna end up being a problem. Foreshadowing. This gonna be a problem. This boy gonna want this marble back. He probably gonna try to do something. They gonna end up getting a tussle. Papa gonna find out. I ain't read it to the book. I'm pretty sure that's what's gonna happen though. Papa's words of wisdom had some merit and she went against it. You done it, Cassie. You done it, cried little man and Christopher John, slapping me on my shoulders as I reached out to claim my prize. Tenderly caressing the emerald blue between my fingers, I held it toward the sun. It was a beautiful thing. We better get back, Christopher John reminded us. That bell's going to start ringing. We all jumped up, dusting each other off. Only little man had no need to dust. He'd seen to that. Some boy, his face long, glanced at me and the emerald blue with sad, vacant eyes and hurried on with Don Lee. I hadn't liked the feeling of that look. Some boy was my friend. Nevertheless, with the marble cradled possessively in my hand, I didn't have time to think about some boy now. I couldn't help it if he was a fool. I hurried with little man and Christopher John after Henry and Maynard, and we emerged from the forest, happily assessing our victory. It was then that our luck ran out. Ooh! Standing near the middle grades class building was Papa. Dang, they ain't even get through the church service. I looked at Christopher John and little man. They looked at me. Then all of us looked at Papa. Come on over, he said. Papa's eyes searched us slowly once we were standing before him. Then he nodded toward my fist, tightly clenching the marble. You got there what I think you got? I swallowed hard, twice, trying to wet my throat. Papa's eyes were steadfast. Yes, sir. There was no use denying it. I only wondered how he'd known. Said Papa. Well, then, I suppose you best be giving it back to whoever you got it from, don't you? Yes, sir, Papa. Now, let's get on back to church. Service about ready to start. Papa didn't mention anything about a whipping, because you're going to get it when you get home. She ain't even get the glory of even sitting through church with it. I thought she was going to at least get through the service, play with it, get home, then get caught, and then get beat. Good Lord. Now, let's get to church. Service is about ready to start. Papa didn't mention anything about a whipping, but then again, he didn't need to. What Papa promised, Papa gave. And one other thing was certain too. Our marble playing days were now over. As we marched back toward the church with Papa behind us, our stomachs churning into acid pits of nausea, some boy's sister, Luella Hicks, headed our way. Mr. Logan, you seen Joe? She asked. I let him hold Doris' hand a while back, and I ain't seen him nowheres. He must be near here, Papa said. I done looked in the church. They ain't there. I thought maybe he had walked on down to the school with her. The big iron church bell clanged loudly. It was time for church to begin. Papa looked up toward the belfry, and instinctively so did Luella. She let out a faint gasp, and Papa touched her arm. Riding the rope that pulled the bell was Doris Ann, giggling with unbridled delight. No one else could be seen. Don't call her, Papa cautioned. She might let go. He left us then, running toward the far side of the church to the side entrance which led up to the belfry. Mr. Page Ellis saw him and asked Luella what was wrong, then dashed off after him, followed by Luella and us. By the time we all reached the side door, Papa was standing on the ladder that led through a small hole to the belfry. Above him on the landing was Wardell Lees holding Doris' hand. A slightly built, handsome brown sugar boy of 15 with haunting sandy-colored eyes that were now fixed on Papa. Wardell was considered peculiar by just about everyone. He seldom spoke, though it was said he could speak, and he never smiled, though he was supposed to be able to do that too. "Boy, what you doing with that baby up there?" Mr. Ellis cried up to him. "You ain't got no brains of a 2-year-old? Don't you know that child could fall?" Papa seemed about to speak, but then his eyes caught the slight shake of Wardell's head. Wardell stared at Papa for a long, long moment, then looked at Mr. Ellis. Doris Ann was securing his arms, but he made no move to come down. "Give me the baby, son," Papa said softly. Wardell hesitated, his eyes searching Papa's. Then, seemingly reassured, he handed over Doris Ann. Papa came down the ladder and gave the child to her mother. "Get on down here," hollered Mr. Ellis. Slowly, Wardell descended, his bare feet revealing the absence of a little toe on each foot. Before he had reached the bottom, Mr. Ellis jerked him off the ladder. "Boy, you done lost what little mind you got?" he asked. "I ought to whip you right here and now about taking that child up there." Wardell's gaze settled on Mr. Ellis. There was no change in the blank expression on his face. "Open your mouth, boy, and talk. What you doing with the baby up there?" Mr. Ellis demanded, angered even more by Wardell's silence. Papa put a restraining hand on Mr. Ellis' shoulder. "Let the boy go on in the church, Paige. No harm's done." Mr. Ellis relaxed his grip on Wardell, and immediately Wardell escaped him, slipped down the steps and through the crowd which had gathered. He ran off toward the woods. "You don't remember how that boy is, David," Mr. Ellis said. "He ain't like most youngins. He ain't right in the head. You got to teach him hard about right and wrong. He just don't know no better." "He wasn't going to hurt the baby," Papa said. "I think he just went up there to get her down." "You telling me she got up there by herself?" "No," Papa hesitated. "No, I ain't saying that. Only I wouldn't be hard on the boy. I got a feeling he was just trying to help." Mr. Ellis only looked at Papa, then came on down the steps. Everyone turned and went around to the front of the church. When we reached the church door, I looked back out to the woods where Wardell had fled. Suddenly, from nowhere, Joe appeared and ran into the woods also. I glanced up at Papa, wondering if he'd seen. Then a thought occurred to me. Where had Joe been all that time when Doris Ann had been up in the belfry? He was the one who was supposed to ring the bell. Before I could ask Papa about it, he ushered me inside the church, where we were greeted by the congregation singing of "Look Out, Sinner, Judgment Days are Coming," which reminded me of my own impending punishment, and that I was no more than Joe, than I had more than Joe to worry about. That's the end of chapter 1. Yeah, I'm wondering where Joe was too. Joe made it a point. Let me go back real quick, because Joe made it a point to let them know. Okay, yeah, let's see. So, as we were making our plans, Joe McAllister wandered over carrying some boy's sister's baby, which is Luella Hicks. Some boy's sister baby. So his niece. Joe was a short, bandy-legged man with a face that could have been 20 or 40. There was just no telling what age he was by looking at him. Big Mom said that was because he didn't have any words to speak of, and folks with no words didn't show their age much. "What y'all youngins up to?" he asked. "Nothing, Joe," I said. Everybody called him Joe. "Y'all see this child here?" he said, which I thought was weird anyway, indicating Doris Ann, who was almost 2 years old. "She showed like old Joe." "That's okay. That's nice," I said. "Just want him to go so we can get on with our business at hand." Her mama always asking me to look out for her. Her papa, too. They know old Joe take good care of her. Why you doing all this reassuring? "Yeah, well, ain't that her mama calling for her?" "Didn't hear nothing. Thought I did. I better go check." "Yeah, maybe you better." Joe walked off a little way, then stopped. "Got to ring that bell come church time. They pins on me for that, you know." "Yeah, that's nice, Joe." So, like, they brushed him off, and then towards the end of this, some other dude, Wardell, that don't speak, holding the baby. We're going to find out more in some coming chapters, I'm sure. So that's the end of chapter 1. Let the Circle Be Unbroken. Sequel to Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. I hope y'all continue to tune in with me for this read. I'll check in with y'all another time. Y'all have a great rest of y'all day. Excuse me. Peace and love.